Okay, welcome to the Kadena Wood Shop. My name's Tom Lewis, and I'm the supervisor here. And the Air Force requires me to make sure that before I let you come in here and use this equipment, you're properly instructed on the safety procedures and the operating procedures of the equipment. It's strictly a safety thing. We want you to be able to come in and do what you want to do, but obviously we don't want you getting hurt doing it. Okay? A little about myself. I got out of the Marine Corps in 1992, and I went to work in a cabinet shop in Springfield, Missouri at entry level. I didn't know anything about anything, but I started out sweeping and staining, doing whatever they'd let me do, and I stuck with it over the years. In 2007, I opened my own shop. We built high-end custom cabinets, built-in furniture, just about anything. If it was made out of wood and you had enough money, we'd give it a shot. And then in 2014, I moved here to Okinawa with my wife, and I was lucky enough to find this job. So actually, every working day of my life for the last 25 years, I've been in the wood shop. All right? I've seen people make a lot of neat things over the years. I've been able to make a lot of neat things myself, but I've also seen some bad things happen. And most of it happened to people that knew what they were doing, myself included on that list. Okay? So the first thing I tell people is, don't get too used to this equipment and don't get the attitude you know what you're doing. Okay? If you have any questions at all, any questions on this equipment, make sure to ask us. Okay? That's what we're here for. We're here to make sure that this equipment is set up safely and properly for you and to guide you through the process to a point. Okay, so we have a couple of general safety rules when you come in here. The first thing is, number one, once you come past the doors, you need to have safety glasses on, right? There's no exception to that rule. One of the things I had to do when I had my shop, I had to take one of my employees to the emergency room, had a 2-inch nail stuck in his eye. It was buried in there about a ½ an inch. And it was all because he was standing there with his safety glasses up, and the nail came out of a nail gun, but he didn't even shoot the nail. It was actually a guy standing next to him that shot the nail, and it ricocheted up and got him in the eye. Okay? They were able to get it out, and it didn't affect his vision. He was really lucky, but it makes you realize real fast, especially if you're active duty, but just about any career can be over in literally less than the blink of an eye. Okay, so make sure that you have your safety glasses on at all times. It gets warm in here. In the summertime, your glasses are going to fog up. You're going to need to take them off and clean them, but when you're around this equipment and you're using this equipment, make sure that you have your glasses on. The next thing is clothing. This time of year, it's pretty warm. We're usually wearing short sleeves. It's not as much of an issue in the summertime, but in the wintertime, when the weather's cooler, people are wearing hoodies, they're wearing long sleeves, things like that. You need to be careful of your sleeves. You don't want to get that caught in anything and pulled in. Watch the neck strings, watch the waist strings. You don't want to get that caught in anything if you're wearing a hoodie. And then also, if you have long hair, you want to make sure that your hair is pulled back. You definitely don't want to get that caught in anything and pulled in. Okay? The other thing is shoes. When you come in here to work, you have to have closed-toed shoes. Okay? I can't let you in here with flip-flops, sandals, or Crocs. Okay? You have to have closed-toed shoes to come in here, and I can't make any exception to that rule. So if you're coming from the other side of the island or something like that, make sure that you've got a pair of closed-toed shoes with you. Okay? The way this is going to work, we go through this a piece of equipment at a time. It looks like a lot of equipment, but there is basically more than one of just about everything. And we'll cover the safety procedures and operating procedures on each of the pieces of equipment. This is the panel saw. We use the panel saw basically to reduce the sheet goods. The bigger pieces of wood and plywood, it allows you to get them into smaller, more manageable pieces so you're not hauling a big 4x8 all over the wood shop. Okay? Panel saw is an easy saw to use. It's fairly tame. There's not a whole lot to it, but there are some things that you need to know when you're using it. Okay? Number one, when you operate the panel saw, you want to make sure that you keep your hands out from between the sled rails here. All right? The other thing is, if you've got a piece of wood that is so small that you're holding it up here around the sled rail, this isn't the right saw to be using for that piece of wood. We've got other saws that are made for cutting smaller pieces of wood. This is really more for larger panels and larger pieces of sheet good. Okay? To operate it, it's fairly simple. All you need to do is get your board lined up where you want to cut it. This particular model, you loosen that clamp. This saw is kind of heavy for the sled, and the sled's going to want to take off once you loosen it, so make sure that you have a hand on it. Okay? It turns on right here. You just want to turn the saw on, run it down through the piece of wood, and shut the saw off and clear it. Okay? Turn it on. Run it down through the piece of wood. Go ahead and shut your saw off and clear it and go about your business. Okay? It's really that simple. There's not a whole lot to it. Some other things you need to remember. On this saw, we have these items right here. They're called stops. And you can put them on this rail here and use them as a reference for your measurement. Or if you need to make repetitive cuts, if you've got a bunch of pieces that need to be exactly the same size, a stop's a good way to do that. Okay? But you always have to remember, on this saw or any other saw, anytime you use a stop, you need to make sure that you're supporting that piece that's between the stop and the blade. Okay? Whether you have a hand on it, if it's bigger, you might want to put a knee on it, or if you want to clamp it, but you need to make sure that this piece is secured. Okay? The stop creates a pinch point. There's a pinch point between the blade and that stop, and if that piece of wood gets sideways in there, it can actually kick it up out of there and get you. Okay? Now, this saw is not going to kick a 4x8 sheet of plywood out of here, but certainly something this small and this light, this saw is strong enough to kick it out of there. So make sure that you're supporting that piece. Okay? When you operate this, make sure that you turn the dust collector on. We have a dust collector over here. You turn it on down here by the motor. Just turn that dust collector on and turn it off when you're finished. Okay? The other thing with any of the equipment, when you're finished with it, we've got some good dust collection in here, but any machine's going to leave a little residual dust and mess. Make sure that you clean up after yourself. Okay? I don't expect it to be spotless, but take the time to go ahead and clean up a little bit when you get done with the equipment. Okay, next piece of equipment is the table saw. Right? More accidents happen on the table saw than any other piece of equipment in the shop. A lot of that's because it's the most used, but the other is these things have an inherent danger, and that's kickback. In other words, if you get a piece of wood caught in there on that blade, it wants to kick it back out of there. Okay? Now, this is a 7.5 horse table saw. We keep a 12-inch blade on there, and that thing's spinning at 60 times a second. Okay? It's developing an incredible amount of torque. And so when you operate a table saw, you need to do two things. Number one, do what you can to avoid a kickback. And number two, position yourself so if you do have a kickback, it doesn't hit you. And in a second, I'll go over two things that you can do to avoid probably 97% of the kickback problem on the table saw. Okay? This saw here, it comes with a overhead blade guard. This guard has to be down in this configuration, just like this, when you operate this saw. Okay? You can't have the side shields up. It can't be leaning back. It can't be off of there. It has to be down, just like this, when you operate this saw. Okay? The on and off switch. The on switch is this green button. The off switch is the red ring around the green button. To turn it on, you just press the green button. To turn it off, just hit the red ring. Okay? This adjustment right here, this is your blade height adjustment. This adjusts the height of your blade depending on how thick piece of wood you're trying to cut through. To adjust it, all you do is loosen the center lock and go ahead and crank this one way or the other, and that raises and lowers your blade. Okay? Now, you want to make sure when you're adjusting the height of your blade that your blade is a good 3/4 of an inch higher than your piece of wood. Okay? That allows the blade to cool, and it also allows the blade to clear some of the chips on the upcut, avoids the blade or the gullets on the blade from becoming clogged up and causing kickback. If you want to put an angle on the blade, that's this adjustment on the side. Same adjustment, loosen the center lock nut, and then go ahead and crank your crank. This is a left tilt table saw. The blade will tilt to the left up to 45 degrees, this is your protractor right here. Okay, just do me a favor, when you get done, make sure to bring this back to 90 degrees. Okay. The fence, to operate the fence, you simply lift the lever, get it where you want it, and push that lever down, and that locks the fence in place. Okay. This has a ruler on here, a tape. The fence has a cursor. It's fairly accurate. If you need an extremely accurate measurement, you're more than welcome to lift the guard to measure from the fence to the blade. But again, that guard has to be down before you actually make the cut. Okay. Now the other thing is, make sure that with any of this equipment, that before you operate, you turn the dust collector on. We've got two dust collectors in here. I've got this one here, and then there's one over on the other side. And the way you know which piece of equipment goes to what this dust collector is just follow the dust collection trope to your piece of equipment, and you want to turn on that dust collector. Okay? Over here, we'll turn it on. There should be a green light. And then this top black button right here says on and off. Just press that button. The dust collector will kick on. And to turn it off, just hit it again and it'll turn off. Okay. All right. I tell people, if you're in here by yourself and you're done with a piece of equipment, you go ahead and shut the dust collector off. Okay. If there's a bunch of people in here, just leave it on. All right. It's easier just to leave it on. Some of this equipment, if it gets clogged up with debris, it can get pretty messy pretty quick. Okay. All right. Let's talk about kickback. Okay, I told you there's two things you can do to avoid 97% of the kickback on a table saw. Number one, a table saw is made to make straight cuts and straight cuts only. Okay. So in order to do that, your piece of wood has to have at least one perfectly straight edge. Okay? Now, our sheet goods, our plywood, it comes from the factory with a straight enough edge to run through the table saw. Okay? Our lumber doesn't. Our lumber doesn't come from the factory straight line, right? You have to generate a straight edge on that piece of wood before you run it through the table saw. And you can do that with a joiner, you can do it with a router and a straight edge. However you do it, you want to make sure that you have a straight edge on your piece of wood. That's number one. Okay. Number two is most people, when they operate a table saw, they make the mistake of watching the blade cut the wood. Okay. It's like a $4,000 table saw. It's probably one of the best table saws on the market. It's made to cut wood. You don't have to watch it. Trust me. What you need to be watching is you need to be watching that straight edge that you generated against your fence all the way through your cut. Okay? If you'll watch that and make sure that you clear that blade with that piece of wood, I promise you 97% of your kickback problem is gone. Okay? The problem is people watch the blade, and what can happen is they can actually start getting off the fence on their piece of wood. Once they're off the fence, it only takes a 1/16 of an inch. Then you're freehanding with a table saw, and that's what causes 97% of the kickback problems on a table saw. Okay? So make sure that you have a perfectly straight edge. Keep it against the fence all the way through the cut and clear the blade. Never leave a piece of wood sitting between the blade and the fence. Again, it creates a pinch point and it can kick it out of there. I promise you, 97% of the kickback problem on a table saw is gone. These things are perfectly safe, and you wouldn't use them if they weren't. You just got to kind of know how to use it. Okay? Again, if you have any questions on any of this equipment, make sure to ask. Okay? Now, we have another table saw right here. This is an identical table saw. It's the same thing. It's a little bit older. But obviously, it doesn't have the guard on it. Okay? This table saw we use for dados, rabbets, or any application where the blade is not actually going to be coming through the top of the piece of wood. Okay? That's what we use this saw for. The guard on the other saw won't allow you to get past the blade because it's got a splitter on it, and instead of taking the guard on and off, we go ahead and leave this one open for dado blades. Okay? Some things to remember when you're making dados and rabbets and using this saw. Okay? A dado is a three-sided groove in a piece of wood. Okay, we can stack several blades on here up to 3/4 of an inch, and it can plow a groove out in your piece of wood. Okay, when people make a dado, they like to get a nice flat surface on the bottom of their dado, and a lot of people get a false sense of security. They have a big piece of wood, the blade's not sticking up through there, and they'll push down right over the blade. Okay, don't ever put your hand right above that blade. Okay. It can kick it out of there, and if it does, it's going to happen faster than you can react, and you're going to end up with your hand down in the blade. The reason I know that is years ago, I was dadoing the end of a cabinet, using my pinky to push down, and sure enough, it kicked it out of there, and my pinky ended up down in the blade. That's why it looks like that. So always keep your hands wide of the blade. Okay? Again, you have to remember, with a dado blade on here, it's generating about 8 times the amount of torque that a regular blade is generating. Make sure that you're concentrating on that straight edge against the fence. Right? The other thing is, make sure to clear that blade. Don't get lazy and drag that thing back across the blade, because it'll grab it and kick it back. Okay? Blade changes on any saw in here, but especially these saws. If you need a blade change, make sure to come see one of us. We'll change the blade. Don't attempt to change any blades on any of these saws in here, or joiners or knives or anything. Come get us and we'll make the changes. Okay? And again, make sure that the dust collector's on when you use this saw. Equipment is a radial arm saw. We have one radial arm saw in here. We use this basically as a cutoff saw. It's used to rough cut pieces, get them into shorter, more manageable pieces. The radial arm saw is pretty much a utilitarian saw. It's not real good for precision cuts, but it is fairly forgiving and allows you to be able to take some of this rough lumber and get it into smaller pieces to be able to work with it, so you're not having to have a big 14 or 18 foot board hauling around the shop. Okay? Some things to remember with the radial arm saw. Number one, this one, we don't make any adjustments at all to this saw. Okay? This saw stays as a 90-degree cutoff saw, and that's it. Okay? To operate it, again, it's fairly simple, but there's some things you need to know. Okay? The way a radial arm saw works, that blade rotates towards you. Okay? And as you cut through a piece of wood, depending on how thick it is, or maybe how wet it is, that blade can actually start grabbing. Okay? And it can grab to the point that it will jump on you. Okay? So make sure that whenever you're cutting anything, number one, leave your path of cut clear. Don't put anything up here in your path of cut. Okay? The other thing is, if you feel it starting to jump on you, just back it up. Back it up, let the saw blade clear, and then cut a little bit, back it up, cut a little bit until you make it through your piece of wood. The other thing you need to know with a radial arm saw is do not cut cross-handed. Okay? And by that I mean, don't cut like this. Okay? I know that looks silly, but you wouldn't believe how many people do it. Okay? Always, anytime you're operating a miter saw or radial arm saw, have your lead hand on the saw and your back hand on the piece of wood. Okay? Your lead hand is, as you're standing in front of the saw, your lead hand is the hand that's closest to the blade. Okay? That's the hand you want on the saw. You want your other hand on the piece of wood. Doesn't matter which side you're cutting from. If I'm cutting from this side, this is my lead hand. I want that one on the saw. I want this one on the piece of wood. Okay? To operate it, again, it's fairly simple. Just make sure your piece is up against the fence. It turns on right down here, the green button. Turn it on. So you got hold of your piece. Pull your blade, your saw through the piece of wood. Okay? You don't need to pull it all the way out. Just pull it through enough to cut your piece in half and then let it go back. Okay? The problem with pulling it all the way out is we have a 40-pound weight on the end of this that helps keep it from running away. Okay? People think they have to pull it all the way out. They're concentrating on pulling this, and they're not concentrating on their piece of wood. They slide it over, and the saw will actually cut on the way back. And at this point, it's cutting in the wrong direction, and it can kick your piece up out. Okay? Just pull through enough to cut it, and then let it go back. Okay? And again, make sure the dust collector's on, and make sure that you clean up after yourself when you get done. This is the joiner, okay? Here at Kadena we have two joiners. We have an 8-inch joiner here, and we have a 12-inch joiner over here, okay? Both joiners operate basically the same, the difference being the width of the width of the bed and how wide of a board you can join on the joiners, okay? Now, the joiner is used to produce a straight edge on a board, okay? Like I said earlier, our lumber doesn't come from the mill with a straight edge. You have to generate a straight edge on it, especially before you use a table saw. A joiner is a good way to do that, okay? The way a joiner works, basically it's got two beds. It's got an outfeed table and an infeed table, okay? The outfeed table is stationary and it's set so that the blades at the height of their rotation are exactly the same height as this bed right here, okay? This bed is adjustable. You can actually adjust the depth of the bed. So if you adjust it lower, what it actually does is as you run your piece of wood across there, it'll cut a little bit off so that it's exactly the same height as this bed. And if you work off of this bed and more or less drag your piece across the blades, you'll end up with a perfectly straight edge, okay? Now, some things that you need to remember. Number one, most people when they operate a joiner use a hand-over-hand method to get your piece through the equipment, okay? Don't operate right above the blade, okay? Obviously, if you have a big piece, you're pushing down or something like that, you can end up with your hands down in the blade, okay? The other thing is, if you are edge joining a piece 2 inches or less, you need to make sure that you use a push stick. And that's one of these yellow sticks right here. They have a little heel on them. You just hook that heel on the back side and run your piece through, okay? The other thing you can do with a joiner is you can face join. You can actually join the face of a board. Use it as a one-sided planer, okay? The thing to remember with when you're face joining is don't ever, when you're pushing your piece across there, don't ever put your hand above those blades, okay? It's the same principle as the table saw. If those blades get caught on something, they can kick it out of there, and if it happens, it's going to happen faster than you can react, and you're going to end up with your hands down on the blade, okay? Always make sure that you use push blocks, which are these items right here, okay? And you simply can use them to push your piece across the blade, okay? It allows something between your hands and the blades if something should go wrong, so your hands don't end up in the blade, okay? Some other things to remember with this joiner, adjustments on this fence, okay? You can adjust the lateral adjustment on this fence, but don't adjust the angle, okay? The setup for this to adjust the angle is really complicated. People don't understand how it works. They end up messing up some pieces, and if it gets out of adjustment, we've got to order parts. It takes 3 weeks. We've got to take this out of commission, okay? We pretty much got this locked at 90 degrees. So if you need to join an angle, go over here and use this other joiner. I'll show you in a minute how to adjust that, okay? Now, some other adjustments on here. You may want to adjust the depth of cut on this joiner. To do that, you want to make sure that you loosen this nut right here. This is your gib nut. And then all you have to do is turn this black handle right here one way or the other, and that will raise or lower your bed, okay? Don't adjust it any deeper than 1/8 of an inch on this joiner, okay? But that's how you adjust the depth of cut, all right? The other thing is when you're operating either one of these, you cannot cripple these guards, okay? You can't hold the guards back. You can't pin them back with a piece of wood. If you're doing something and you're having to do this, you need to be using another tool, okay? You cannot cripple the guards on any of this equipment, okay? This joiner over here, this is a 12-inch joiner. It's just a bigger version of that, okay? It's exactly the same. The only difference with this is if you want to put an angle on the fence, that's fine with this one, okay? To adjust the angle on this, all you need to do is loosen this nut right here. You can pull this stop, and then using the handle, you can put an angle on the fence, okay? When you're done, do me a favor, put it back to the stop and go ahead and tighten it back down. Okay? If you need to adjust the lateral depth of this fence, you loosen that top nut and then use this handle. That's how you adjust the lateral depth. Okay? To adjust the depth of cut, that's this adjustment right here. Okay? What you want to do is you want to loosen this large knob right here, and this is your handle, and this will adjust the depth of cut. Okay? Now, something about this joiner. Okay? This joiner will do that, okay? But don't do that. Right? Don't go any deeper than 1/4 of an inch on this joiner. Okay? If you have a board and you run it through there twice, at 1/4 of an inch, you just took a 1/2 inch off that board. Okay? If you need to take a 1/2 inch off the board, you don't need to be using a joiner, you need to be using a saw. Okay? So make sure that you keep the, watch your depth of cut. Okay? And again, on these joiners, make sure that the vacuums and the dust collectors are on. Okay? These will generate a lot of chips, and they'll get clogged up. If you're getting to the point where you've got a bunch of chips that are being thrown out the back, or you've got a big puddle of chips around your work area, that means either the dust collector isn't on or your chute is clogged up. You need to turn it off and come get one of us, and we'll get it fixed for you. Okay? Next piece of equipment is the planer. We've got one planer here. It's a 20-inch planer. Some things you need to remember about the planer: they're pretty easy to use, but they need a little bit. It's all in the setup. You need a little bit of time to get it set up. Right? The first thing you need to do is, if you have a piece of wood, you need to get a good, accurate measurement of how thick your piece of wood is that you're getting ready to plane. Okay? If it's just a solid piece of lumber, usually you can measure in 2 spots and get an idea of how thick it is. If it's a glued up panel, you might have some pieces that are a little higher or a little lower than the other. Make sure that you measure it in its thickest spot. Okay? To set up the planer, if this piece, say, is 1.5 inches, what I want to do is I want to set the planer at 1.5 inches, or just slightly less than 1.5 inches. And by slightly less, I mean about a 32nd of an inch. Okay? To do that, on this planer, you want to make sure that you loosen those 2 black nuts right there. Those are your bed locks, right? You want to make sure that those are loose first, and then just crank this wheel. Okay? This is your cursor, and then there's a ruler right here, and that's your indicator on what the depth of cut on this would be. Okay? You want to get down here at eye level, and you want to adjust it to whatever depth you want. In this case, I'm going to adjust it to 1 inch, right at 1 inch. And I'm going to go ahead and tighten these bed locks. Okay? You only need to finger tighten these. These are simply there to lock the bed in place, keep it from vibrating, to give you a nice, accurate plane. Okay? Once you've got it set, turn it on. You run your piece of wood through there. It's a big metal roller. It's going to grab your piece of wood, pull it through there. The blades are going to shave a little bit off. A planer works from the top. It's not like a joiner. Your blades are on the top, so make sure that you put the side that you want planed up. Okay? It'll plane a little bit off, and then a rubber roller will bring it out the back. It's basically pretty automatic. Okay? Now, on each consecutive cut, if you want to take a little bit more off, what you need to do is go ahead and loosen those bed locks and adjust your planer. Okay? Now, this planer, don't go any more than 1 full turn at a time. Okay? For each cut. Right? The other thing is, I tell people, listen to the planer when you're operating. Okay? It'll tell you if you're cutting too much off. If it's really growling and struggling, making a lot of noise, that means you've got it set too deep and you need to back it off a little bit. Okay? Again, turn it on. Green button right there. Turn it off. The red button right there. And make sure that the dust collector is on when you use this. Okay? Now, all this equipment that we've covered so far that has a cast iron bed, okay? This equipment is a lot safer and works a lot better if these cast iron beds are slick. Okay? One of the #1 causes of woodworking accidents is a dull blade and a sticky bed. Okay? What it does is it causes you to have to use a lot of force if your bed's sticky to get your piece through the equipment. Okay? If you're operating a joiner or a table saw where you have a more or less an open blade, you're using a lot of force, and if something goes wrong, you're normally headed right towards the blade. Okay, so here in Okinawa, with this humidity, these things can build up a thin coat of rust in just a day. Okay, and they can actually get pretty sticky. Okay, we have two things here that we can use to slicken up these beds. Number one, probably the best choice is paste wax. We usually keep a can of paste wax here. Simply use it like a car wax. Dust your bed off, take a little bit of that wax, rub it on there, get a rag or a paper towel and buff it off, and it should be nice and slick. It'll last for a pretty good while. The other thing, we keep a can of silicone. Okay, this is spray silicone. You can take this, again, dust off your bed, spray it. It doesn't take much at all. Okay, this stuff is it's really slick, and you don't need much at all to make it work. It won't last as long as paste wax, but it'll slicken it up. Okay, the only thing is you need to be careful with this because it works just as good on the floor as it does the equipment. So make sure that you aim it at the equipment. If you're walking around and you get in some that is on the floor, you feel a slick spot, make sure you come get one of us so we can get it cleaned up. We don't want you slipping and falling and hurt yourself. Okay? Okay, next piece of equipment is the bandsaw. We've got a couple bandsaws in here. We have a 14-inch bandsaw, and then we have a larger 24-inch bandsaw over here. Okay? The 14-inch bandsaw, this is real good for irregular cuts, thinner pieces of wood. They're not a scroll saw by any means, but it's a good way to make those irregular cuts. Some things that you have to remember though with a bandsaw. Biggest piece of safety advice I can give you with a bandsaw is normally you're going to be cutting on a line. Okay, whether it's a pencil line or an imaginary line, keep your fingers off that path of cut. Okay, keep your fingers wide of the blade as you're maneuvering through your cut, and you shouldn't have any problem. Okay. Adjustments, probably the most important adjustment on a bandsaw is this apparatus right here. Okay, this is your blade stabilizer. All right, what this does is this stabilizes your blade in relation to how thick of a piece of wood you're cutting. Okay, if I don't use that and I don't adjust it, and I've got that thing pushed all the way up, what happens is, as I'm cutting, if I go to turn my piece of wood, I don't have anything to stop the blade from turning. Okay, what it does, it puts a twist in the blade, and it's going to cause the blade to either come off the track or break. Okay, so before you get started, just take your piece of wood, set it behind the blade, and then drop this thing down on the blade, on the piece of wood, and raise it back up about 1/8 of an inch, and that's about the proper setting. Okay, that'll keep your blade nice and stable. It'll also give you a much better cut. Okay, this one has a light on it. You're welcome to use the light to operate it. It's real simple. Okay, you just turn it on, push your piece of wood through there. The other thing is, make sure that if you're making irregular cuts, okay, keep your forward momentum going. Okay, don't stop in the middle of your cut and try to turn your piece of wood. Okay, again, what that's going to do is it's going to pinch the blade or twist it, and it's going to cause it either to come off the track or it's going to break it. Okay, now if by chance you do break the blade or it comes off the track, come get us, and we'll get another one on there, or we'll get it put back on. Again, don't try to change or fix any of these blades at all on any of this equipment. Okay, as a matter of fact, any of this equipment, if it requires any kind of a hand tool, okay, a pair of pliers, a screwdriver, an Allen wrench, I don't care what it is, if the adjustment is not attached to the piece of equipment, come see us. Okay, it's not that we don't think you know what you're doing, but some of this equipment, if it's adjusted wrong, can be more dangerous than it already is. Okay, that's the 14-inch bandsaw. Okay, we've got this bandsaw here. This is a 24-inch bandsaw. And obviously you can tell by the size of this blade, there's quite a difference, okay? You're going to be a little more limited to what kind of a curve you can cut, okay? You wouldn't think that you could break a blade like this, but it'll break in a second, just like that one will. So this one is really for thicker pieces of wood. If you've got maybe a long sweeping arc to cut, something like that. If you need to kind of pre-straight line a piece of wood, if you've got a longer piece of wood and the edge of it is kind of got a little bit of a bow to it, and it's going to take a bunch of times to go through the joiner, get it straight, you can come over here and kind of eyeball a straight line and then go through the joiner and probably cut your time down a little bit. The other thing this saw is good for is if you want to resaw, okay? And resaw is when you actually take a thicker piece of wood, and you might want to make 2 thinner pieces of wood or veneer or something like that out of it. This saw is good for that. Okay. Some things to remember with this saw. Again, this is your blade stabilizer, and it's just as important on this saw as it is the little saw. Okay. Again, this blade will break just like that little one will, and it's a little different story. These blades run about 80 or 90 bucks a piece, so do what you can to try to keep these blades intact. All right, to operate this blade stabilizer, you simply loosen this lock nut back here and then crank this one way or the other. And again, you want it down there pretty close to your piece of wood, probably within 1/4 of an inch. Okay, the closer you have it to your piece of wood, the more stable your cut's going to be and the better results you're going to get. Okay. Now, come around here. I usually get this about 3 times a week. The bandsaw won't turn on. So, to turn this one on, you need to have, the key needs to be on 1. You have a 1 and a 0. The key needs to be turned to 1. And if you go to turn it on, it's not going to come on. Okay? It has a safety detent on the off switch. You actually have to turn the off switch until it pops out, and then you should be able to turn it on. Okay? Now, to stop this saw, once you turn it on, let it get up to speed before you make your cut. It's got some big wheels. It takes a second to get up to speed. Once it's up to speed, go ahead and make your cuts. And then to stop this saw, just press the off switch in, and that kills the power. Okay? Now, some things to remember. This saw isn't like these little ones. They don't have a brake on it, or a manual, or a automatic brake. Okay? You need to come over, and there's a brake down here. Make sure to break that blade before you leave this saw. Okay, that blade will actually run out for about 1.5 minutes, and it gets quieter and quieter and quieter. In the last 30 seconds, it's dead silent. It's actually still moving, but it's dead silent. And if somebody comes up there and tries to make an adjustment, they're going to end up cutting their finger off. Okay, make sure. Don't walk away from this saw without breaking the blade. It needs to be completely stopped. Okay. Next piece of equipment is the miter saw. All right, we have 2 miter saws in here. We have this one, and then over on the over by the other side of that beam right there is the other one. Okay, this one is a 12-inch sliding compound miter saw. Okay, that one over there is just a regular miter saw. It doesn't slide out. It'll cut about 6.5 inches at 90 degrees. This one will cut up to 13.5 inches at 90 degrees. Okay. Now, again, some things, considerations with the miter saw. Biggest thing, number 1, just like the radial arm saw, do not cut cross-handed. Okay. Again, I know that looks stupid, but you would not believe how many people do it. Okay. Make sure you're standing there. Your lead hand is that hand that's closest to the blade. That's the hand that needs to be on the saw. Your other hand on the piece of wood. Okay. Doesn't matter which side you're cutting from. Lead hand on the saw, back hand on the piece of wood. Okay? Now, also, with a sliding compound miter saw like this, the proper way to use it is, get a wider piece of wood here. The proper way to cut with this is to come out, go down into your piece of wood, and push it back. Okay? Don't go into your piece of wood and pull it out. All right? The blade is coming at you. Okay? If that gets caught on a knot, there happens to be a nail in there, anything, if it causes the blade to grab, that thing can jump up out of there and get you. Okay, it's going to happen fast. It's probably going to happen faster than that thing can drop. So always come out, go down into your piece of wood, go back. Okay. Adjustments on these are pretty easy. There's usually a thumb clamp. Just press the thumb clamp down. Put your saw at the angle you need it. This is a protractor right here, and then push this down right there, and that locks your saw in place. Okay. These models have some preset stops on them. Do me a favor, don't drag that thing across every stop. Make sure that that thumb press is pressed and take it to where you want it and then let it go. Okay, by dragging it across there and hitting each stop, number one, it wears out the detent pin, but number two, it grabs your protractor and will take it out of adjustment. Okay. If on this model, if you don't need to use the slider, if you're cutting a smaller piece like this, you probably don't need to use the sliding portion. You want to operate it just like a regular miter saw. There's a black button right back here in the back. Just finger tighten that, and that will cripple the slide, so now you can just use it as a regular miter saw. On your smaller pieces, you want to do that because it makes it more stable and a little bit safer. You're not having to work with it running all over the place. Okay? The other thing I tell people with these saws, if you're cutting an angle, before you actually make a cut, make a dry run, okay? Especially if you're making a compound cut. But actually set your saw and make a dry run, okay, without a piece of wood in there. The problem is, over the years, people, they don't pay attention to what they're doing and they end up cutting into the fence, okay? Always double check your cut before you actually cut into a piece of wood, okay? If you need to make a bevel cut or a compound cut, this nut back here, you loosen that, and that will allow you to adjust your head. There's a button back here you can loosen. It'll go both ways. Okay. Just do me a favor when you get done. Bring it back to 90 degrees and tighten that nut. Okay. This saw has a light on it. It's not a laser light. It's a shadow light, but it works pretty good. You can use it for a reference for your cut. Okay. And then the last thing I tell people on these is, you know, Walt makes a great miter saw. This is a precision piece of equipment. A lot of people don't understand that. This is to make precision cuts, okay? And if you want it to work for you, you've got to treat a saw right, okay? There's two things you need to do. Number one, when you use it, let the blade get up to speed before you make the cut, okay? Don't just go down into a piece and turn the saw on, okay? Let it get up to speed. And number two, take an extra second or two and let the blade cut the wood. Okay? A lot of people make the mistake, they just cut down through a piece of wood, and what happens is your blade, it's not really cutting. What it's doing is it's actually grabbing and it's vibrating, and you're going to end up with kind of a cruddy cut. If you'll take it, take that extra half second or so, that's the difference, okay? We keep premium blades on these saws, you'll get a perfect cut every time, okay? Besides that, it's easier on the equipment. Okay, here at the wood shop, we do have a lathe. It's a nice Powermatic lathe. It's a manual lathe. You're welcome to use this lathe, but you're not going to be signed off on your card once you receive your card. This requires a little bit of extra instruction. To get qualified on this, you need to check with one of the attendants in the shop, myself, or one of the two IHAs that work here, and we'll get with you and we'll work with you until we're confident that you know how to use it, and at that point we'll go ahead and sign you off on the card, okay? But make sure before you try to operate the lathe, you come see one of us. Okay, another piece of equipment we have here is a dual drum sander, all right? This is like the lathe. Okay? This is here for you to use, but again, you're not signed off on this. This requires some extra instruction in person to make sure that you know how to use this. So again, before you actually turn this on, if you're not signed off on your card, make sure you check with one of us, and we'll work with you again until we're confident that you know how to properly use it, and then we'll sign you off on your card. At that point, you'll be able to use it whenever you need to. Next item we have is we've got a couple sanders in here. All right, we have a vertical belt sander, a disc sander, and a horizontal belt sander or an edge sander. Okay. Now, some things you want to remember with a sander. A lot of people they kind of take these for granted. Be careful with these. Okay. These will get you pretty quick if you don't watch what you're doing. Some rules with these sanders is don't come up here with little bitty pieces of wood and try to use these sanders. Okay? If you've got something really small you need to make sure that you maybe get a Jergens clamp or something and put it in a clamp, okay? That way if something goes wrong, you take the end of that clamp off, you don't take the end of your finger off, okay? It's gonna hurt a lot worse to take the end of that clamp off than it does your finger, okay? The disc sander here, make sure the cutting portion of this disc is from the center to the left. This thing operates in a counterclockwise motion, so if you've got a piece up here, this is your cutting area, okay? If you're past center and you're over on this side, you're wrong. That's why we've got this sander, okay? This thing's spinning counterclockwise. If you get a corner dug in there, that thing can kick up out of there and get you, okay? So make sure that you stay on the cutting portion of the disc here, all right? On these, you can adjust the angles on the beds, but again, when you're done, make sure that you bring them back to 90 degrees. Okay? This sander here is an edge sander. Be careful with this, right? This has a 1.5 horse motor. We keep an 80 grit belt on this thing, and it's got a lot of grab, okay? Again, don't come up here with a little bitty piece of wood and try to sand it, okay? Make sure that whatever you're using, you got a good firm hold on it. Make sure that you ease into the sander and push against the sanding grain. This thing is going to run, again, counterclockwise, okay? Be careful with bigger pieces. Don't stand behind the piece and sand like this, okay? If you get that piece, if you got a piece of plywood or something, you get that dug in there, it's liable to come back and get you in the tummy here. So make sure that you always stand above your piece as you run it through the sander, and that way if something happens, you're not between the sander and wherever your piece is going. Okay? And then the other thing, when you get done with any of these sanders, make sure that you find one of these blocks. These are belt cleaners, okay? And all you need to do is, once you get done, and try to do it right when you get done, take it and you just rub it up and down on the belt, okay? You don't need to grind it off. Just rub it up and down on there once or twice, and that will clean your belt, okay? Wood's got sap in it, plywood's got glue in it. It gets hot, it develops pitch, it gets in the grain of the belt, and if you'll get it out while it's hot with one of these, it'll take 90% of it out, okay? If you don't, what happens is it ends up like this. It turns to like epoxy in there, and you're not going to get it out, and what happens is the next guy that comes up here and tries to use this is probably going to burn the end of his piece of wood. It's not really going to sand it, okay? So take the time to clean the belt. It's the right thing to do for the next guy, and helps us keep your costs down. Some other tools we have in here are wood routers, okay? Wood router is a great tool. You basically can do anything with a wood router, right? If you know how to use it, if you find the right bit and you set it up, you basically can do anything with this router right here that you can do with any other piece of equipment in this shop, okay? It's just knowing how to use it and how to set it up, okay? Some things to remember though, with a router or really any other portable tool that we have in here, if you're making any adjustments to this, it needs to be unplugged, okay? Do not make any adjustments to any portable tool without unplugging it, okay? These things go from 0 to 16,000 RPMs in a split second, and you know, this thing weighs 20 pounds. If you got hold of some wrenches and this thing kicks on, it's probably going to do a lot of damage to you, okay? So make sure that these are unplugged when you use them, okay? In here, I've basically got 3 different kinds of routers, all right? I've got a big 3¼ horse. This is a heavy-duty router. If you can do it with a router, you can do it with this router right here, okay? It's made for panel raising, dadoing, just about anything, okay? This is a 1.5 horse router. It's a little more medium duty, good for most edge forming applications, maybe some light dadoing, some other applications. And then we have these laminate trimmers, okay? These are super light duty. They're actually made to trim laminate is what they're made for. They're not really made as wood routers, okay? Over the years, cabinet makers figured out you can take smaller edge forming bits, you can put them in here, and they work pretty good. You can buy 3 of these for the price of 1 of these, so you can leave them set up and time's money. However, over the years, people that don't know what they're doing have just put anything in here, And what's going to happen is you're going to overload the piece of equipment, and it's kind of like the I told you on the miter saw. There's going to come a point where the blade's not cutting anymore. It's just going to be vibrating and chewing, and you're going to get a terrible result. Okay, so if you want a better result on the heavier duty applications, use the bigger routers. Okay, we have about 80 different router bits in here. I won't say we've got every router bit you need, but I haven't found anything in here that I couldn't do with a router yet. Okay, if you need a router bit, we keep the router bits back behind the desk. Just come in there. We'll work with you, and we'll see if we can find the right bit and help you get set up. Okay. We also have some router tables. We've got a heavy-duty cast iron router table here. That one has the 3 1/4 horse under it, and then we have a lighter-duty router table here that has the 1.5 horse. Okay. Again, if you need some assistance getting some of this set up, come ask one of us. Okay. These are great tools, but they can things can go south pretty quick if you're not careful. Okay, next piece of equipment is the drill press. We have 2 drill presses in here. We have this benchtop model here, and then we've got a heavier duty floor model as you come into the shop. Okay, some things to remember with the drill press. Okay, this is another one that people tend to underestimate. Okay, these things have a lot of torque, and they can pull on a piece, and if they're not, you don't have your piece properly secured, bad things can start to happen. Okay. The biggest thing with a drill press you want to make sure is that your piece is secured to the point that it can't become an extension of the rotation. Okay, and you can do that a couple of ways. You can clamp your piece right to the bed, or possibly maybe take something and clamp it to the bed as a fence. But anything that can stop that piece from rotating, that's what you need to make sure is done before you operate the drill press. Okay, once you work past that, they are fairly simple to use and fairly tame. Okay, some things to remember with this drill press: we don't adjust the speed on this. Okay, this is set probably about 350, 400 RPMs. Most woodworking applications, that's probably what you're going to use. If you need something faster or slower, you can go over and use the big drill press. There is a clutch crank on the side up here, and a digital readout, a tachometer, and you simply turn the crank until you get it to the RPMs you need, and then you can go about your business. Just make sure once you get past 300 or 400 RPMs, you know what you need the speed for. Okay? Next item is a spindle sander. We've got 2 of these in here. The spindle sander is real good once you get off the bandsaw, maybe use a sander to sand those irregular cuts and get a nice smooth edge. Okay? Some things you want to remember with this: when you're working with a spindle sander, stay up here on the table when you're working. Okay, and by that I mean I get people that have longer pieces that they're working on, maybe a paddle or something like that, and they'll get way back here with a 6 or 8 foot paddle, and they're sanding, and they get off it and they hit it, and they get off it and they hit it, and they don't realize it, but they have a lot of leverage at the end of that, and they end up bending these shafts. Okay, and the spindles start to get a wobble in it. Okay, they still work, but they don't work the way they're supposed to. You don't get that nice smooth edge. So if you have something long, have somebody hold the end of it, make something to support it, whatever, but do your sanding up here on the table. Okay, we've got several different spindles, different size spindles. If you need a spindle change, come see us. We'll change the spindles. Even if the wrenches are out here, do not try to change these spindles yourself. Okay? They don't righty-tighty. They go the wrong way. Too many people think they're loosening it, and they're actually tightening it. And what happens is they get them on there so tight, we have to get a heat torch to get them loose, if we can even get them off there. Okay? So make sure that you come see us. We'll be more than happy to stop what we're doing and change it for you. Okay? The other thing is, don't let your spindles wear out to the point where they wear through the rubber. Okay? Make sure if they're starting to wear out in a spot, come see us and we'll get you a new spindle. Okay? If you wear through the sandpaper into the rubber, number one, it tears up the rubber spindle, but number two, every time you try to sand where that's torn up, it's going to ruin the next spindle. Okay? So again, any changes, make sure that you come see us. Okay? Next piece of equipment is the scroll saw. We've got a couple scroll saws in here. Scroll saw is real good for making those real irregular tight cuts. Maybe you want to cut your name out in a piece of wood. They operate with a really thin blade on an up and down projection, and they're able to make really fine cuts. Okay. Some things to remember though. These aren't quite the industrial duty that some of this other equipment is. Okay. You've got to be pretty patient with these. These are made to cut maybe 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch material. Anything thicker than that, if it's not softwood like pine or cedar or something fairly soft, you're going to start running into some problems. You're probably going to start breaking some blades. Okay? You probably want to take those thicker pieces and do what you can over on a bandsaw, and then maybe come over on the scroll saw and clean it up if you have any smaller fine cuts. Okay? Some things to remember with this. Number one, these don't have a guard on them, so be careful with them. Okay? Use the same principle as the bandsaw. Keep your fingers off the path of cut. Okay. If they have a blade hold down here, if you're not going to use the blade hold down, make sure that the apparatus is completely off the blade and spun around. Don't bend them up and down. By bending them up and down, you're going to break it. These are coming harder and harder to replace. And if I break one, I got to take it out of commission for a couple weeks. Okay. To change the blade, if you break the blade or you need to come up through a cut, simply loosen this knob right back here. You loosen it to the point that this arm, you can push that arm down and the blade will pop out of there. Okay. This little apparatus here has a little slot and the blade has a T across it. When you push that arm, you'll be able to get the blade out, and then to replace it, just do the same thing. Just make sure that when you put the blade back in, you tighten this pretty tight. Okay, the blade needs to be kind of banjo tight. If it's not tight enough, what's going to happen is your arm is going to start opposing the stroke of the motor, and your blade's going to start bending, and eventually it'll break. So make sure that that's good and tight. Okay. Okay, the mortiser. A mortiser is basically used to drill square holes. Okay, it's like a drill press, but it drills square holes, and it does it by setting up a series of drill bits with a chisel around it. They've got an auger bit, and what happens is the auger bit takes out the bulk of the material, and then the chisel squares out the round hole. Okay. Some things to remember when operating this. Okay. It is a drill press type thing, so you want to make sure that your piece is nice and secure. There's some adjustments on here. You can use these hold downs. You want to make sure that your piece is good and secure when you're operating this. The other thing is, they have different size chisels for different size mortises. Okay, if you're doing a 3/4 inch mortise, you don't want to actually use a 3/4 inch bit. Okay, you want to use like a 1/2 inch or a 3/8 inch bit, and you want to use it like a chisel. Chisel away at your opening. Okay, the problem is if you overwork it and you try to use a too big of a bit on your mortise, what's going to happen is you're going to dull the blade and burn it, and that's going to transfer the heat to your chisel and end up dulling your chisel to the point that you're not really going to be cutting anymore. You're just going to kind of be mashing it down. Okay, so again, if you need any help getting this set up, it's here. You're welcome to use it, but come see us if you're not familiar with it, and it takes a couple minutes of some hands-on instruction, but we'll get you caught up to the point that you should be able to become pretty proficient. Okay. We need to go over a couple of hand tools. First one is the Biscuit Joiner. Right? Biscuit Joiner basically is kind of like a portable spline machine. You can use it if you have a couple of pieces of wood maybe that are different thickness. A biscuit joiner is a good way you can inject the blade, makes like a half circle, and they sell little wooden wafers, and if you'll do it from the surface of both pieces, even though they're different thickness, and when you put that wafer in, it keeps it lined up. Okay, it's a good way to do stuff like that. Some things to remember with this. Number one, I tell people, treat it like a weapon. Don't pull the trigger, don't inject it until you're ready to use it. Okay, and then again, it's a portable hand tool. Make sure that it's unplugged when you make any adjustments. Okay. Again, if you need any further assistance with a biscuit joiner, come see one of us, and we'll kind of give you a little bit of extra instruction until we're comfortable. You're comfortable. You know how to use it. Next item is the belt sander. We've got a couple different sanders here at Kadena. We've got half sheet and a quarter sheet vibrating finish sanders. We have some 5-inch Velcro orbital sanders, and then we have these 4-inch belt sanders, right? Sanders are another thing that people just, they kind of underestimate. Okay, be careful with these things, especially these belt sanders, all right? These are for something that's pretty significant, okay? They're not for a small piece of wood. Whatever you use this for, a couple things. You've got to make sure that your piece is secured, all right? Whether you use a stop block, whether you actually clamp your piece to the table or you screw your piece to the table, however you do it, these are very powerful, and people get kind of a false sense of security. They got a big piece and it's holding, and they'll go ahead and sand it. What can happen is that piece break loose, and I'm telling you, this thing will launch a half sheet of plywood from here to the other side of that table, and if somebody's between here and there, they're not going to like it. So make sure that, number one, your piece is secured. Number two, make sure that your area is clear. Watch the cords, all right? Every one of these cords has been in there 2 or 3 times. Make sure you don't have any pencils, papers, anything like that. Watch your shirt tail. I'm real good about getting my shirt tail caught up in there, okay? Watch stuff like that, all right? To change the belts on these, again, make sure that these are unplugged. Normally people hold the handle to pull that back, and if that thing's plugged in and you pull that trigger, you'll often get a finger run up around there. Okay? Make sure this is unplugged. Okay? To change the belt, there's a lever down there. You just pull that lever back, that'll loosen your belt. Okay? Go ahead and put your belt on, let go of that lever, and that's how you tighten it up. Okay? I tell people, if you use a new belt or a cold belt, use it for a few minutes. Okay? Use it for 3 or 4 minutes, let it warm up. Once those belts warm up, they tend to expand, okay? And that can cause them to start tracking one way or the other, okay? If they get too loose, they may track into the side of the sander. If they do that, they're gonna start tearing up your belt, and if it's tracking hard enough, it's liable to rip it and tear it up before you can get a chance to use it, okay? Use it for a couple minutes, flip it over, see what it's doing. If the belt is pushed in or pushed out too far, simply start it, and then use this adjustment right here. You can turn it clockwise or counterclockwise, and that will track your belt. Okay. Ideally, you want that belt. There's a 4-inch aluminum plenum, and you want that belt right above that plenum. Okay. That's when they operate the best. Okay? Some other things. When you plug this sander in, don't ever plug it in with it sitting on the table. Okay. These have a detent pin. I can pull that trigger and press that detent pin, and if I plug this in, it's going to start, okay? And if it's sitting like this and I plug it in, the sander's going to take off, okay? At best, it's going to roll off the table and break the sander. At worst, it's going to roll off the table and break somebody's foot and the sander. So make sure that those are on the side. Hit the trigger once or twice before you actually plug it in, okay? Then do me a favor, on all the sanders, before you bring them in there, empty the bags, make sure the bags are empty, and then we have an air hose with a blower here in the shop. Find the air hose in the blower and go ahead and blow the dust off them before you actually bring them back in the shop. Don't bring us a sander that's full of dust, please. Okay? And then the last piece is the nail gun. Okay, like I said at the beginning of the course, you need to make sure that you've got your safety glasses on when you're operating a nail gun. Okay, make sure the people around you have their safety glasses on. Right, these nails can go in any direction. They don't always do what you want them to do. Some crazy things can happen when you use these. Right. Some other things to remember with a nail gun. If you're using a nail gun, this comes from years of experience. If you've got an 1¼ inch nail in the end of it, keep your finger farther away from the end of that gun than 1¼ inch. Okay. Like I said, they don't always do what you want them to do, and nail doesn't know the difference between skin and wood. Okay, you'll end up shooting your finger, and that hurts. Trust me, I've been there. Okay, the one thing that you do need to know, if you do end up shooting yourself, come in there, let us know. We'll put a Band-Aid on it. We'll fill out some paperwork if we need to, and we'll do what we got to do. But if you shoot it and you get it in the bone, and you're going to know pretty quick because you're going to be like attached to your project. You're going to need a pair of pliers to get away from it. You need to come see us. okay? The problem is these nails have glue on them, and if they get in your bone, you actually risk a bone infection, okay? And you may not know anything right away, but down the road you really start running into some problems, right? So be careful with these. They're fun to use and they're easy to use, but they can make a weekend go south real fast, okay? Over a couple of admin things. Number one, once you get your shop card, you'll be signed off, like I said, on all the stuff except the drum sander and the lathe. Again, make sure that you get the instruction you need to get signed off on that. On the back side of the card will be our hours of operation, our phone number, some things you need to notice. Okay, we're closed on Monday. We're closed on Monday, and then we close Wednesday at 1700. Okay, normally we do our advanced classes on Wednesday evening. If we don't have a class, if we got people in here, we'll stay open. But before you come down on Wednesday, you may want to give us a call because we may end up having to kick you out of here at 16:45. Okay. Also, make sure that you understand work stops 45 minutes prior to when we actually close. Okay, so if the shop closes at 2000, the DIY portion of the shop, you need to stop your working 45 minutes prior, 7:15, start cleaning up your area and heading for the door. Okay, my guys have to clean up the shop. It takes 45 minutes. They don't get paid overtime, and they want to get out of here. Okay, I understand. We understand sometimes you might be running a little bit late, and that's fine. We just ask you don't make it happen. Okay. Let's talk about lumber. Okay. You can bring lumber from anywhere. If it's wood, you can bring it in here and work with it. But we've got a couple of rules. Number one, if it's used lumber, all right, and used lumber is any piece of wood that has a nail hole in it or a screw hole in it. That's a used piece of lumber. You cannot run it through the planer, and you cannot run it through the joiner. Okay. If you're one of those people who likes to work on pallets and stuff like that, that's great. You can bring it in here, you can cut it, you can sand it, but you cannot run it through the planer and you cannot run it through the joiner. Okay. If you want to buy lumber from us, we sell mostly American domestic hardwoods. We sell in random widths and lengths. We don't sell dimensional lumber. We don't sell 2x4s, 1x6s, stuff like that. All our lumber that we sell comes in random widths and lengths, right? And when you sell wood in random widths and lengths, or you buy wood in random widths and lengths, it's measured by the board foot, okay? And a board foot is simply a volume thing. It's 144 cubic inches of wood, okay? So if you come in and you see a board you want, say you want this board right here. This board is 4.58 board feet of ash, okay? If you want to know how much it costs, you come over to the price list and look for ash and go over, and it costs $4.55 a board foot. So if you'll take that 458, multiply it by 455, that's how much that board costs. Okay. Now, I can sell you the whole board, or I can sell you half the board. Okay, and half the board is cut laterally, not ripped. Okay. That's the only way I can sell that lumber. Once that board has been cut, if it has a fresh cut end, you have to buy that board as it is. I can't cut it any smaller. Okay? We do that because if we keep cutting it, eventually what happens is we end up with a bunch of small pieces that we can't sell. So remember, if you've got a smaller project and you're going to buy wood from us, you're going to have to buy at least half the board. Okay? Sheet goods, plywood. Most of our plywood corresponds with the hardwood we have. All our sheets come in 4x8 sizes, 4 feet by 8 feet. Okay? We'll sell you a full sheet, 4x8. We can sell you a half sheet, and a half sheet can be 4x4 or 2x8. Or we can sell you a quarter of a sheet, 2 feet by 4 feet. Okay? And that's as small as we can go on that. With any of the lumber or any of the sheet goods, you're welcome to look at it while it's on the rack, but before you actually pull anything off the rack, you need to come get one of us. Okay, don't pull wood from the rack without an attendant being here. Okay. Some other things. Around the corner over here, we have a finish room. All right. You're welcome to come in. You can use the finish room to finish your project. If you're using, urethane or brush finishing, staining, anything like that, you can do that back in the finish room. All right. But here's the rules. Anything that you bring into the finish room has to go out with you at the end of that session. Okay? You can't leave anything in the finish room. That includes rags, brushes, material, empty cans of material. Anything that you bring in needs to go out with you at the end of that session. You can leave your project in there to dry, that's fine, but any material or anything like that needs to go out. Okay? We also have over here, we have a downdraft table. This blue table right here, this is a sanding table. Okay? If you're sanding your parts, come over here and sand on this table. Okay? It's designed to, kind of like a dust collector, you turn it on, and it'll pull all that dust down and it filters it out. Okay? It makes it a lot more comfortable for people in here. They're not sucking that real fine dust. Okay? Make sure, even if you have a larger project, kind of bring it over here by the table. Works area wide. You can sand here. If you got a table or something, you sand it on, and the dust will get sucked out by the machine. Okay? Some other things we have in the office, down at the end of the hall, there's a box. That's a scrap bin. Okay? It's got, you're welcome to anything in there. You can use a scrap. You know, if you're setting up a machine, a dado saw, the router table or something, you need to run a piece of scrap to test your cut, go get a piece of scrap out of the scrap box. Don't use your project. You'll probably ruin it. If you're making jigs or something like that, you're welcome to anything in that box. All right? If you have leftover material and it's usable scrap, and know what usable scrap is, okay? You're welcome to donate it, but remember, it's not a trash can. Don't put every little block and scrap of wood in there. Okay, if we keep every little scrap of wood we have, we wouldn't be able to move in here. Okay, know what's usable scrap and know what needs to be thrown away. If you have any questions, ask myself or ask one of the attendants, and they'll tell you. Go ahead and throw that away. Go ahead and put that in the scrap bin. Okay. So now, once you have your card, you come in, and at the desk there will be some clipboards. You simply take your shop card. Fill out the form on the clipboard. You need to fill out your name, phone number, the date, and the time in, okay? And a brief description of what you're working on, a birdhouse or whatever, okay? The shop rents for $4 an hour, okay? If you're here more than 10 minutes, we charge you $1. Goes by the 15-minute segments, okay? We also offer a craftsman fee. You can pay a $60 fee anytime. And it's good for a calendar month. If you were to pay it today, it's good until the same date the next month, and you basically can use the shop as much as you want. Okay, works out to about 16 hours. If you're going to be in here more than 16 hours in the next 30 days, it's a way to save some money. Okay, and then the last thing you need to know is incidentals, things like screws, glue, nails, things like that. You need to provide those. Okay, we sell nails for our nail gun, we sell biscuits for the Biscuit Joiner, we sell sandpaper for our sanders, and we sell lumber. Anything else, you need to make sure that you have that when you come in. Okay, we don't provide that. Okay? So at this point, you should be able to go ahead and take the test. Once you pass the test, we can go ahead and issue you a card, and you'll be ready to use